friends, it's Erin Harner here, gut health, IBS and SIBO coach and integrated registered dietitian nutritionist. And I'm coming at you today from my own kitchen here in my house. I haven't been here in a while talking to you, so I'm happy to be here. And yesterday on a coaching call, I was actually talking to my clients in a group and they were all very curious because I told them when I came home from a long trip, I had tons and tons of cucumbers. And I told them, what the heck do we do with cucumbers when we have an excess? Because they're not typically traditionally storing vegetables. So what do we do with them? I know exactly what to do with them. Let's make pickles. So today we're going to make some pickles in two different varieties. These are slicers and these are spears. They're lactofermented, so you can see the little bubbles coming up. That's from the lactic acid bacteria. And I'm going to show you how to make those today. Okay, so let's first talk about ingredients. So what you're going to need are cucumbers. The best place to get cucumbers are fresh from your own garden, from a friend, from a neighbor. We're going to get fresh cucumbers. You never want to use cucumbers to make pickles that have been sitting around for a long time or have any sign of mold or decay, because they are going to propagate that in the jar and then you're going to have moldy pickles and you're going to have to throw the whole batch out. So we don't want to do that. We want to get nice fresh cucumbers. I just happened to walk out to my garden this morning and pick these. They are growing in abundance right now and I want to do something with them to preserve them because otherwise we're going to have to compost them if we can't eat enough. All right, so what we're going to do is we have fresh cucumbers. Farmers markets are also great places to get cucumbers. Again, they don't last very long, so people want to sell them, they want to get rid of them, they want you to take them home and use them. Next up, we're going to use salt. I really like to use Redmond real salt for fermentation. It has a really nice flavor. I don't like to use any sort of salts with anti-caking ingredients because I find that they are not as delicious and you can notice the taste in the end product. So we have some good quality salt with minerals. We're going to use some garlic, and I'm going to show you two different ways to make the pickles today. One, traditionally how I would make lactofermented pickles, and the second way for sensitive guts, a low FODMAP version and a low insoluble fiber version. We're also going to use two other ingredients that you might or might not have. I just happen to have these growing in my garden. The dill comes up as volunteers. These are heads of dill. Let me see if I can separate one. It's a head of a dill. And we're also going to use some leaves. So there's some different leaves that you can use. I typically like to use grape leaves because they grow in abundance where I live. They're really easy to find. We can use grape leaves. We can use oak leaves. We can use raspberry leaves. We can use sour cherry leaves if you have them. We can also use a black tea bag if you don't have any of these floating around. So don't worry about it if you don't have leaves. You can just use a good quality organic black tea bag, and that's going to provide tannins. And tannins are really important for pickles because it's going to make it so that the pickles ferment well without getting squishy and soft. So that's really key. All right, let's get preparing our pickles. So we're actually going to make 2 quart jars of pickles today. These are just quart canning jars, and we're going to make 2 quarts of pickles. I often will just make a half gallon of pickles. This is a half gallon jar, and that's what I showed you before here. But we're going to do 2 quarts because I'm going to show you 2 different ways to make the pickles. So I've got my 2 quart jars right here. And what we're going to do is in the bottom of this first quart jar, we're going to put 2 cloves of garlic. I'm going to just leave the skins on because garlic is water soluble and the garlic flavor will just seep into the brine of the pickles without needing to do much else. You can also see my other ingredients here. I've got the dill, I've got the grape leaves, I've got my salt, and I've got my cucumbers. For the first jar of pickles, this is going to be the regular jar. I'm going to do about half of my dill. I've got about 3 heads of dill here. If you don't have regular heads of dill, it's totally fine. You can use dill fronds if you have them. You can use dill weed from your cupboard and go to the farmer's market or go to a friend who has a garden and ask them if they have any dill. You can also use dill seeds. So totally up to you. I like to use the heads because they're the most flavorful. Next, what we're going to do, in this one, I'm actually going to skip the garlic. We're going to make this a low FODMAP sensitive stomach version, which is really actually hard to find at the store. If you're finding traditional brands like Bubby's or others at the store, it's very hard to find pickles that don't have garlic in them, which is very high in fructans or FODMAPs. So to this one, I'm actually going to skip the garlic and I'm going to do some black peppercorns. This is about a teaspoon of black peppercorns. And I'm also going to do a couple bay leaves for flavor. So these are just bay leaves out of my cupboard. We're going to use 2 bay leaves in here. Just give it a little more flavor. Very common ingredient in traditional New York style pickles. And that's the base of our pickles. So now what I'm going to do is just prepare the cucumbers. And we've got our 2 different varieties of pickles here, and we'll just go to town cutting them. If I had a giant cucumber like this one that I wanted to use, I would probably set this aside until I'm ready to cut. The first thing I am going to do is I'm just going to measure how many cucumbers we have here so you have a better idea of what the quantity looks like if you're going to go buy cucumbers. I'm going to change my units from grams to, got a kitchen scale here. I've got a nice flat surface. We're going to go to pounds and ounces. It's torn. So I'm going to do all of these cucumbers, which is probably what's going to go in these jars. So that's 1 pound, 12 ounces. So if you want an idea of how many pickles fit into these 2 jars, this is 1 pound, 12 ounces. So we'll see how we do as far as measurement goes. We'll do both of these as slices because they're delicious. You can also do cucumbers whole. They take a little longer to ferment. So all we're doing here is we're cutting them in half, and then I'm just going to do a couple wedges. It's important that your cucumbers are roughly the same size when you put them in your jar. I'm going to set the big one aside and we'll do the little ones first. These are pickling cucumbers. You can see how they have more knobs on them than traditional slicing cucumbers that you'll find at the grocery store. I have pickling cucumbers by design because usually what I do with cucumbers is I pickle them because they're delicious and they're great for your gut. However, if you don't have pickling cucumbers, you can use slicers. Just realize that they have a little bit more seeds in the middle and they don't hold up quite as well for quite as long in storage after you ferment them. So you can see all I'm doing here is just taking my slices and just kind of pressing them into my jar. This is not a specific or difficult task. However you want to do it is fine. The other thing to note is that I am cutting off the top and the tail of the cucumbers, and this is really, really important. That blossom end of the cucumber has a lot of enzymes that will degrade the cucumber when it's fermenting and when it's stored. You don't want that on there because it's going to make your pickles really soft and squishy, and they're not going to keep very well. These will typically store at least a year in the fridge. They store a really long time and they stay nice and firm because you cut that blossom end off. And the second thing you're going to do is you're going to add the tannins, and the tannins are going to come in the forms of the leaves like I mentioned. Some people also like to actually add horseradish leaves, and it'll make it a little bit spicy, which is also delicious. So you can add some flavor with the leaves that you're actually using. I have used oak leaves. Oak leaves are great. They're easy to find. Literally go out to the tree that's near you and pick an oak leaf if you've got an oak tree near you. Just keep in mind that oak has a slightly stronger flavor than grape and some of the other ones that I mentioned. But use what you have available to you. Black tea bags are also great. Don't sweat it. Just use what you've got. This is a really simple task, a really simple project that doesn't take very long. So I usually set aside like maybe about 15 minutes to do 2 half gallons, a gallon of pickles. It really does not take very long at all. So you can see here that my guesstimate of the amount of cucumbers that would go into these 2 jars is pretty close. I'm almost there. I just got a runaway cucumber here. I'm also not being too specific as far as my cuts and making them exactly perfect. It's totally fine. Just do whatever works for you. I am going to squish these down a little bit though. Okay, so that's really all we needed to do. Let's stick this one in here. And sometimes if you can see that there's lots of seeds, sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually just cut those seeds off and then stick them in our jar. And this one looks like it could use another little slice. Perfect. Okay, so that's really all you need to do. So our jars are prepped. We've got our garlic version and our low FODMAP version here. If you wanted to make some pickles that had low insoluble fiber, if soluble fibers like the skins of vegetables really bother your belly, what I would recommend is actually peeling the cucumber and then doing the exact same thing that I just did. You're just going to do the exact same thing with the peeled cucumber. You're going to just slice it into slices. You can do a better job at peeling it if you want. I like to leave a little teeny tiny bit of the skin on. But if you want to peel it completely, great. You're just going to make your pickle slices like this without the skin. So that's how we're going to get the soluble fiber from the cucumbers without the insoluble fiber. So you can actually make these however you want to work for you and your own belly. All right, I'm going to set these aside and we're going to go to town with these 2 jars of pickles. So we have our ingredients prepped. Now it's time to make the brine. So when we're making the brine, this is a really important step. I like to use a kitchen scale to measure because you get more accurate measurements than if you were going to use tablespoons or cups. When it comes to salt, what we're going to do is we're going to fill this jar with 6, I've got my half-gallon jar here that I'm not using for the pickles, and I'm going to fill it up to 6 cups with water. Okay. So I have my 6 cups of water here, and now we're going to tare the scale and we're going to do some salt. So our water is really, really important. You want to use fresh, pure water, and you want it as pure as possible. If you need to use reverse osmosis, if you need to use a purified water, if you need to use distilled water, those are all great. You really want as pure water as possible because things like chlorine, things like antibiotics in the water, those are going to kill the bacteria that you're trying to ferment. So you want to make sure that any sort of chlorine has been removed from the water, or this is not going to work very well. All right, so for our water, clean, pure water, we're going to use 6 cups. Why? Because I've done this a whole bunch of times, and I know that 6 cups of water for brine will fill our 2 jars. So we've got 6 cups of water, and now we're going to do a 5% salt solution. Typically with cucumbers, we want to do between a 3.5 and 5% salt solution. If you're doing a whole gallon, that could look like about 3/4 of a cup of salt to 1 gallon of water. I'm not making that many pickles today, so I'm just going to do 6 cups of brine. 5% salt solution for 6 cups of water is 72 grams. 72 grams, if we do a little math, yes, sometimes you have to do math in the kitchen. 72 grams is going to work out to be about 4 tablespoons of salt or a 1/4 cup. So if you'd rather not use a scale and you have just tablespoons and cups, that's fine. I'm going to do 72 grams because I find that weighing is more accurate. However, if you want to use tablespoons, I've got them right here. If you want to use tablespoons and measuring cups, I would just do 4 of these. And that's totally fine too. This is not a specific activity. Get close. Close is really close enough. So we're going to just stir up our brine. You can see that it has a nice pink color because the salt itself has a lot of minerals in it. And that's okay. I'm not worried about those minerals causing any problems in our ferment. All right, so we're going to give that a really good stir. And then we're going to pour the brine over top of our pickles. Fill that up. And we're going to do the same over here. As the pickles ferment, you'll notice a few things. One thing is that they change color. The color change is a factor of the pH or the acidity changes in the ferment. Pickles are not notoriously good fermenters, so that's something to keep in mind. That's why the salt solution for pickles is much higher than it would be for many other types of vegetables. Like let's say you're doing a crucifer like cauliflower or broccoli, it's going to be much lower than pickles. Pickles, because they're cucumbers, they're not traditionally great fermenters. You've got to do a higher salt concentration. The next thing we're going to do after we pour in our brine is we're going to add our grape leaf. So we're going to just stuff the grape leaf in the top. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the pickles to stay under the brine solution. Rule number 1 is that the ferment stays under the brine. You can use 2 leaves if you want. 1 leaf is fine. Whatever you want, it doesn't really matter. This is going to cover up those pickles and keep them under the brine. And then we're going to use a weight to do the same. It's just going to weight it down and keep it under there. All right. You can see how it's spilling over the top a little bit. And that's something that I like to plan for in advance. So next up, I'm going to use these things called pickle pipes. I've used lots of different fermentation tops over the years. These are my favorite because they're easy to wash. They're super simple. I'm just going to stick these on the top and then I'm going to put the lid on. And that's that. I usually like to use a stainless steel like 8x8 cake pan, and I'll stick them in here so that when they invariably bubble and water escapes, it doesn't ruin anything on my countertop or make a big mess. So I just like to put them on something that's going to catch any drips. And over the next 3 to 5 days, what's going to happen is you're going to start to see these pickles go from looking like this to looking like this. And when they look like this, they're really nicely colored, they're bubbly, they look like pickles. You're going to open up the jar. You're going to wash your hands first, of course. You're going to take out the weight and you're going to try one and see what it tastes like. Oh my gosh, so good. Delicious. Those taste like pickles. They've been fermenting for about 4 or 5 days. They are definitely ready. When they're ready, what you're going to do is you're going to take off the top. You're going to take off the jar with lid. You're going to take out the weight and you're just going to put a regular mason jar lid top on it. You're going to label it with a date and stick it right in your refrigerator. And this will keep 6 months, 8 months, a year, no problem. I find that it's hard to keep them in my refrigerator because they just get eaten. My kids love pickles. They're so delicious. So these are going to turn into these very quickly. So just keep an eye on them, 3 to 5 days. The lids allow the CO2 to escape because as that Leucaena stalk bacteria start taking over the ferment in the beginning, it's going to produce a lot of lactic acid, which is going to acidify the mixture and allow for Lactobacillus plantarum to really thrive. And that's one of those Lactobacillus species that is so, so good for our guts. And here we have 2 different varieties of pickles. We have our low FODMAP version and we have our regular lacto-fermented pickles. I hope you enjoy them. Leave a comment if you love them and let me know how it goes. Talk to you soon, friends.